expanded cast list.
Well, there we go. So we are now live on the Facebook, and I think YouTube is following us very shortly. So, Kat, why don't you take her away?
Welcome to the Unifying Force. I'm Kat, joined by Dave and Gio. How is everybody?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Doing well this morning.
And today we're going to talk about motivations of various characters in Star Wars. How'd you like to kick it off, Dave?
So, this one's kind of a little bit inspired by Spencer, one of our admins for the Facebook page, and a little bit inspired by what's been going on in the Bad Batch, season 2. And not really too spoilery if you haven't seen it, because we'll be watching that in the Cantina happy hour on Tuesday. But we're specifically let's talk about and start off with, what is the motivation behind, Sheev / Emperor Palpatine to okay, if you want to go all Pinky in the Brain, try to take over the galaxy? Like, where did that come from? It's like out of left field. I mean, when we see him first, in the main scheme of things, he's a senator from Naboo, right? We don't have too much of the backstory in main canon of where did he come from before that, what were his roots, and what. So we want to examine, where do you find, what do you think in the source material that we know of, what's up with this guy? Why does he really want to go through all of the hoops and masterful planning? I think you'll find out it's absolutely the puppet master, as you'll see in our original like Bad Beard Batch graphic t-shirts. Totally the puppet master of the galaxy, but why does he care? What do we think? Gio?
So I think that it's well, I guess if we go right back in release order to when we first came across Palpatine as the Emperor, he was already the shadowy figure behind the scenes, pulling at Vader's leash, as it were, in Empire. So I think from the jump, we've been given this idea of this kind of supreme mastermind, puppet master, exactly as you're saying, manipulating things from the shadows. And it seems that his sort of motivation is tied into the kind of different factions that he represents in the Star Wars galaxy itself, in that there is him as a very manipulative and selfish individual, and then there is him as the figurehead and the Dark Lord of the Sith, whose ultimate aim is to bring about revenge on the Jedi, to bring about the fall of the Jedi Order, and to essentially exterminate their sworn enemies in sort of opposing sides. So his motivation comes out of kind of two main areas: him as a sort of individual character, and then as a representative and figurehead in a much larger ideology and philosophy in the Star Wars galaxy, and then also the one that he creates himself, which is the Galactic Empire, forced to dominate, control, extract, and exploit everything that they can around the galaxy. So it's, I guess it comes about partly in the way Palpatine was originally written, in that it starts off quite one note, and then as we go through the Star Wars saga and we're given more backstory, a little bit more, at least with the prequels, we see that he had relatively unknown origins and seemed to have a sort of a plan ahead of time, that he eventually manipulated the chessboard pieces back and forth to bring about this one kind of moment of revenge and one big moment of changing the entire way of the galaxy's structure to his own personal scheming. So it's there's a lot, and there's not so much that we're given, and we kind of read into it a lot, given how George Lucas created the character and the different bits that have been added to Palpatine's character as we go through Star Wars material.
Yeah, and I get that he's the Dark Lord of the Sith behind the scenes even, but maybe Kat, you can add to this when you chime in. Is why is we get, in Tales of the Jedi, we get Dooku's motivation and why he's kind of turning and why he becomes Sith like, or why he's teamed up with the bad guys. But what's happened that's made Palpatine turn over to the dark side? We see Anakin's turn to the dark side. We see Dooku's. Is what's up with Palpatine and where is he on that?
That's a blank area because they have not explored that yet. The only hint they give is that he was a senator from an underrepresented backwater planet. So you don't have that much power. You don't have that much ability to do anything about it. So he manipulates the system. And while he is a hypocrite for not recognizing his own dogma as a Sith, whereas he's able to recognize the Jedi's dogma, he seems to genuinely believe that the Empire is going to be a good thing. Unlike most villains who think they're only having a positive impact, he knows that what he's doing is getting a lot of people screwed over, and he gets a lot of sadistic enjoyment out of that. But it seems to be coming from a place where he thinks it's going to make things better, and because he's a megalomaniac, and we don't really know anything about his upbringing or about exactly why he joined the Darth Plagueis novel. It was more about his relationship as an apprentice to Darth Plagueis as opposed to why he decided to join him in the first place. And so it's and none of the movies ever really expanded on it, and neither did the TV series. So that's a bit unfortunate. And then when episode 9 came along and said that he was aware of this whole Sith planet for a really long time and was setting up like a bunch of contingencies because he seemed to be really paranoid that he would lose power. But the only other driving force seems to be that he's afraid of death. Like he'll do anything that he can to cheat death. And the dark side is a path to do that. Like he says, a pathway to many abilities that some would consider to be unnatural. But that's about it. It's like he recognizes the Jedi are dogmatic and corrupt. He recognizes that the system is corrupt and needs to be replaced with something works. Because the thing is, in the Empire, if you're gung-ho and in favor of the Empire, then it's actually pretty good for you. If you have a problem, the admirals and the Imperials will come and help you with it. You pay your taxes and it could be great. And there are a lot of people who did like the Empire. So he seems to think that he's genuinely helping things and making the system better, getting rid of the Jedi. And then there's a bit of his own dogma and vengeance because he's a Sith. So by definition, he's going to hate the Jedi and he wants to live forever in this power, but they never really do dive into why. It's kind of like, kind of like the Wicked Witch in Wizard of Oz. Why is she wicked and evil? Well, no real reason until that play Wicked came along. It's like she was just the evil witch just because. And same thing for Palpatine.
Well, see, that's one of the things that I find interesting about it is we hear the whole, story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, and so that's kind of the hint at his backstory. And there is the Darth Plagueis. I think there are. I think Mike's in the chat. You can comment. I think there are comics on that, and I think there's a novel. But yeah, you start to he was an apprentice. He was under this big bad Sith master that made him want to be all controlling. But then in Rise of Skywalker, you find out he had a family behind the scenes of this whole deal. I mean, was that his first attempt at cloning and keeping his legacy before all this cloning backstory that we're getting into that they're exploring in every sort of show that there ever was? I find him very, very duplicitous and not even in necessarily a purposeful way. I mean, there's that yes, okay, here I am playing the good guy senator, and he is, although slightly creepy though. Don't you get that impression? He's the good guy senator, but slightly you want to watch that guy. And then over here, put the hood down, and I am now the evil puppet master. But even more beyond that, I don't get, and that for people looking to create other types of content for the Star Wars universe that we're always looking for, this is a huge area that I think is completely ripe to get into. And it's like, what happened to just flip that switch? Or we could find out that, it was the Sith had some sort of type of programming like the Jedi. Was he taken from parents and raised as a Sith from a baby, from when those Force abilities were first found? Is that how the apprentice system works in the Sith? I don't think we even have any concept of that in canon. Everything that we see that's taken someone, Anakin was brought over as they found his Force abilities by Palpatine as an adult. Dooku, was the Jedi that was converted. I think do we get hints at Maul that was potentially that he had been in sort of like an apprentice system for a lot longer than we see him, or not? But thoughts on that? How do Sith become Sith? Where does that come from?
Well, they kind of shed some light on Maul with the Night Brother arc with Savage in Clone Wars season 3, and where you learn that not only is he one of the Night Brothers, he was actually Savage's actual brother. And even though they don't get into specifics with Maul, I mean, some of the comics did, and then there's a couple Legends books which actually did dive into Maul, but then they kind of changed a lot of that up for Clone Wars. But we kind of get what that was about. It's like they were in a subservient society, and then the Sith came by and decided, hey, I want to recruit one of these for an apprentice, and they probably paid him a lot of money. And because I guess it's kind of what it is, because they never really say what Dooku gave to Mother Talzin to get her to hand over Savage. It's like, I'm assuming that he paid her or gave her some type of guarantees because he's, filthy rich and all that. But apparently Palpatine made a similar offer for Maul, whereas and that made sense because Maul was just like a samurai. He was just an assassin, didn't really have a intellectual part to play in the plot. Whereas Dooku was somebody that he actually needed, who had somebody that he didn't even have to groom because he was already ready to go.
Yeah, and in that sense, you get more of an illustration of Palpatine's character in a way, in that he was just ready to use whatever he could to kind of climb his little ascension behind the scenes in terms of getting more influence and more power as a Sith, using the apprentice that fit for his plan at the time, and then tossing them aside, which I guess gives more insight into Palpatine's very, very ruthless and Machiavellian character, and the fact that he just exploits what's best for him at the time, and then throws it aside when something, a new improved aspect of climbing the ranks can come about for his plan to ultimately fall into power in both sides. I think it's kind of interesting because Palpatine has the kind of dual climbing of steps, in that he's got the very public way of wanting to ascend to power, which we see in Revenge of the Sith ultimately come to fruition. And then it's the kind of backdoor behind the scenes accumulation of power, which he does, that actually enables him to come about and make that public turn of face, and for the galaxy to sort of accept it en masse in general, that the plot of the Jedi to overthrow him and the assassination attempt and all these things, that there's been lots of planning behind the scenes, and using characters that aren't necessarily Palpatine itself, but with Maul, and seeing more of his backstory, in that he was, again, as Catherine just said, subservient society that Palpatine came along and entirely exploited, extracted the value that he needed to go about and start the events that would eventually lead to the Trade Federation escalation on Naboo and the events of the Phantom Menace. And that was the main catalyst for the events that we see through the prequels. And so he's very much just exploiting everything he can around him to accumulate more power and to really use his people as resources, entirely coldly and entirely callously. And so that's we just see more aspects and examples of that as we get into wider material. And the Clone Wars does a fantastic job of showing the kind of both sides of these things, because there's the political element and the uncertainty with different planets not really knowing their place in the Clone Wars. We see that very clearly with Mandalore being one of the 1,000 independent systems that didn't want to side with either the Republic or the Separatists and kind of remain sovereign and free, and how that plays out later down the line. That being one huge aspect in Palpatine's plan that wasn't really in his control, and he didn't really plan for, but managed to exploit and kind of have that opportunistic side come out of him later on when you see the whole siege of Mandalore and using the different groups within a certain system to again create like a proxy war that then he entirely exploits and uses for his own gain. So there's, yeah, Palpatine is kind of, on the one hand, very one note and very simple, but on the other hand, because of the events written around his character, you could say there's a lot more going on. We're just not necessarily given specific motivations as to why he is, so evil, why he is the Dark Lord of the Sith, why he chooses to stay in that sort of position, and why he wants to bring about this plan other than for his own megalomania and for his own dominance.
Well, I want to ask some further questions just from what we've been talking about. Some other questions come to my mind is like, how is it brings to question the entire Jedi prophecy at this point? Because you say always, well, always two there are, no more the rule of two. Well, if there's only two Sith ever, because we don't see a point where there's like a bazillion Sith other than Exegol, and we're not even convinced those are real people or what those things are, and who knows. But why do the Jedi, numbering in the thousands, need to bring balance to that? There's two of those guys, there's thousands of us. Well, guess what? The prophecy did fulfill itself, and you got messed up and screwed on that deal. But the other is, but from what point did Palpatine's whole scheme go? Was he being an opportunist and using what others had set in motion? The creation of the clone army under Master Sifo Dyas, those had been going. They'd been manufacturing clones for a long time before we see Palpatine, who's probably when we see him as a young senator on Naboo, what is he, 30s, mid-30s? Is that
I think he's 45, 47, around there.
Okay, is that what
in the original film? I know that Ian happened to be the same age that his character was supposed to be when they filmed episode 1.
Okay, that was the question I was asking. Is
how
old Ian appeared
50s,
to look at that point?
53, I think. I think he was born in 46. So he's about 53 in Phantom Menace, which he does look that age. So that's about appropriate.
Okay, so that's slightly more interesting, because I thought he was billed as a young senator from Naboo or whatever, and
he already looks like an old man in that one.
Yeah. Exactly. So I'm like, and Mike is adding over here on the YouTube chat that the Palpatine family is a line of nobles from Naboo, with a very similar background to Count Dooku from the other planet. So that family, so that's really interesting that already having that kind of power that Dooku had, and was able to affect so much change just using that power, the power of, cash, coin of the realm. You needed the mysticism and the unlimited power of the Sith. But at what point did he start? What happened? When did this start happening? Was Palpatine pulling the strings and manipulating behind Sifo Dyas? Did he see what Sifo Dyas had already done, who maybe had similar motivations, and tag on to that and keep going? Or has he been the puppet master the whole time?
Well, in Tales of the Jedi, they revealed that Dooku was already had the the clone project underway at the time of Episode 1, because that's when he deletes Kamino from the archives, and he already knew Palpatine. He already had an established relationship with Darth Sidious at that time. So that seems to be something that they're both in on, going back a ways, because that's how you bring balance to the Force. You got to wipe out the Jedi who are corrupt, and you got to wipe out the Sith, which is why that's achieved at the end of Return of the Jedi, when Palpatine is finally done it. Like the Force needed Palpatine to succeed to get rid of the dogmatic, corrupt Jedi, which had failed everybody. And the consequence of that is that he has a Sith Empire that lasts for 23 years, and then Luke and Leia come along and destroy him, and then you have balance. Because balance is not a mathematical thing in this sense. It's like peace or an equilibrium being brought to things, but the Jedi are too dogmatic to see that they're part of the problem. And so that's kind of the Force willing thing. Because Anakin, as a chosen one, doesn't really do anything. Like in the prequels, he's there, but his presence kind of gives the Jedi the excuse to keep taking the wait and see approach with the Return of the Sith, and they don't get to talking about it directly until Episode 3, when they're on the gunship, and they start second guessing the prophecy at that point, because they've been basically clinging to this idea that, oh well, if he's the chosen one and things are getting bad, he'll just be able to pop up and do whatever they think he's going to do to save everybody. But that's not his purpose. He's there to make sure, like a Trojan horse, that they keep sleeping on it until it's too late to do anything about it. And so that's why Qui-Gon, who is more pure of heart, could see the end of the road. He could see the balance of the Force at the end of it, and how Anakin is ultimately the one who finishes the job, but he couldn't see but because he's so focused on that greater good accomplishment, he can't see all of the horrible things that are going to happen in order to achieve that.
Well, and that's another argument to look at. One of our previous episodes, is Anakin still, or was Anakin the chosen one, in the fact that he didn't really necessarily do all of those things, where he wasn't there when the balance was brought. Was the chosen one really Luke, and Anakin's purpose was to bring Luke into being? Or was the chosen one Rey? I can hear the hate coming through the screen.
Well, they've never really told us who made the prophecy either. I mean, it's been written about in legends, but the thing about prophecies is they're not guaranteed to be real. Like Yoda says, it can be misread. So it doesn't, and it's only because of their dogma that they think that chosen one is going to help them specifically. It doesn't really mean he has to actually do anything, because he serves his purpose and essentially achieves what needed to be achieved, just not in the way the Jedi thought.
Well, and completely and totally, I think the prophecy being vague has served its Star Wars purpose to the writers very, very well, keeping it vague, because you can have these discussions of, well, was it Anakin? Is it Luke? Could it be Rey? Could it be little baby Grogu? Let's go with that. Yes. All of these things continue to move the story forward and allow you opportunities to continue telling tales and creating arguments like this. All right, so let's move beyond a little bit of just what are Palpatine's motivations, and we may circle back to that a little bit, but just anybody go toss up, pick a character, pick a Star Wars character, and let's talk about the motivations behind what they're doing and what's going on with their life in the saga. All right, I'll break since we have the silence here. As Mike's commenting over here, what if Anakin's opportunity to bring balance was when the father offered him to take over on Mortis? Did he miss the opportunity to bring the balance there?
Maybe, depending on if Mortis actually has an effect on anything, because it didn't. Because Mortis was balanced before he showed up, and it was only when they showed up that things started falling apart on Mortis. So it's like, but we didn't see what the effect of that was on the rest of the galaxy because Mortis is outside the space-time continuum. So if we didn't see how all the chaos happening during the Mortis trilogy and all the balance falling apart there had any effect on the galaxy, then then who's to say that it has much of an effect on anything? Because that's kind of one of the questions, like, where does it exist? Does it mean anything? Are these just exceptionally powerful beings in the Force who just kind of exist in their own pocket universe? So he could have done that. He could have achieved balance on Mortis, but would that have changed things in the galaxy? I don't know.
Yeah, that sort of ambiguity, I think, made Mortis both really fascinating as an individual storyline, but also a little disappointing in that you don't really see the wider effects of it because it is a very isolated storyline. But that I was wondering when that would factor into this discussion of like the prophecy and bringing balance again, because it is one of the few times when you had writers kind of specifically address the idea of balance and what that means. And again, even though you've got the structure of a father, daughter, son, and you've got and you could say, okay, well, if we're going numerically, then you've got Anakin, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, and they had their sort of equivalents in these very powerful Force spirits. But I think then if you fixate on the numerical aspect of it, then you miss the wider point of the prophecy being exactly as Catherine was saying. It's about stability and a sense of peace and harmony, not necessarily numbers. And the Mortis arc, I think, did a really good job of showing that there was a chance for peace and stability, at least within that sort of isolated realm. But yeah, we can't really say how it would have affected the galaxy as a wider whole.
Well, Mike is arguing here that it was after Mortis fell apart, is after the balance and things were unhinged on Mortis, that is when Palpatine really skyrocketed in the galaxy, and maybe that disruption in the balance on Mortis is what allowed the evil to really reign in the rest of the galaxy. That's the effect.
Maybe, because that happens during the Clone Wars. And again, they never really cut away from Mortis to see what changes, and it doesn't seem like anything did, because at the end, Cody confirms that they were gone for like off the radar for like a second. Mm-hmm. But I do know that Mortis played a large role in Colin Trevorrow's Superior Episode 9 script that really did try and have it directly relate to everything. And I'm willing to bet that he had conversations with Dave Filoni about that, because as Filoni said, there are answers to all the Mortis questions, but as it stands in the way they've portrayed it, I mean, we've seen that other beings in the universe are aware of Mortis because of the murals that go to the world between worlds and all that, which seem to likely be making a comeback in the Ahsoka show, if the graphics for the logo are to be believed. Yeah. But that's still another thing. Like, did that have an effect on anything in terms of motive, or is that like a religion that people believe in? Like those ancient societies who think that, oh, people came down from the sky who are superior, we're going to worship them like gods. But are they real? You can imagine that in Star Wars. Like if a Jedi master or a Sith went to some really primitive planet and started doing crazy magic, and that would be like, oh God, you're like a god,
Oh, you've just created my new favorite next Disney Plus show. Is essentially, let's take Star Wars and put it in the premise of Stargate.
Well, that's basically it. They do have a Stargate now with the world between worlds. And
yeah, that door is definitely one that's kind of ajar a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you've got some good points there on both. Is like, I think we're going to see more of the world between worlds and more of the effects of Mortis, or the effects that Mortis could potentially have on the galaxy with the Ahsoka show. You know, it's written by the same people who supervised, if not wrote, the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars. It's Dave. You know, he's gonna go deep dive and tie things together as best he can. And also the whole thing too is I understand why they did it, but I wish they hadn't done it in Rise of Skywalker. If Exegol just didn't exist and that was Mortis, if where all that Palpatine and Rey conversation and if that had happened in the World Between Worlds, you wouldn't have needed the convoluted cloning yada yada blah 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 that they did it. It's just no, my spirit is still here in the World Between Worlds. I think it was done and made a physical planet to make the people, you know, Billy D. Williams and Poe, and come in and be able to physically do some damage in that space. It just would have been too cerebral for the vast majority of casual fans, which tend to be the people who they cater to in a lot of the movies. But it would have made a whole lot more sense to those of us who watch all the properties and the animation. And I'm just here to say, once again, we say this often on Rebels Revisited and some of our other shows. If you're not watching the animated Star Wars content, I know I'm preaching to the choir, the people that are watching the show, but if you're not watching it, you are missing some of the best Star Wars out there. Some of the best writing occurs in animation. Some of the best really kind of performances of some of these little side characters and things that happens in the animation. And you're really starting to see now that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, who are, you know, Dave, creators of that animation stuff, and John, a super fan of it, you're starting to see how that really affecting and bringing into the larger canon is what's happened in animation is totally what's happening affecting the Mandalorian and what's going to happen in season 3. It's because of all that Legends of the Darksaber and that sort of thing that happened in Rebels and in the Clone Wars. And if you want to watch more of that than what we're talking about here, watch Rebels Revisited on Monday. But yeah, let's go back to where we were like 10 minutes ago, unless somebody else has any more parts of that. Pick another character from Star Wars and their motivation. And I'll give you the easy one, which is Watto. Your Jedi mind tricks don't work on me, only money. And that's it. That's Watto's motivation from the entire thing is, you know, he lets Anakin go with Qui-Gon because Qui-Gon want to bet. Yeah, Qui-Gon a little cheated with a little chance cubes a little bit, but who's to say Watto didn't have weighted chance cubes to he was trying to cheat to begin with, so Qui-Gon cheating just brought balance to the Force. But it's an easy one. His motivation is only money. You understand it, and from what I understand in the galaxy, that is the motivation of his entire species. Is others? What do we think?
Isn't there a line by Harrison Ford? He's effectively in the first Star Wars film, he admits to only being in it for the money. So
Yes.
you could say, you know, that there's always room for a character being just that kind of single individualist mercantile type approach. Watto is much more like a shopkeeper merchant, and not necessarily a merc, but you have that since the beginning. Got some Han Solo's reason for coming into aiding Obi-Wan and Luke from escaping Tatooine is, okay, so you guys have a problem, I have a solution, it's going to cost this much, you know, you meet me here, and there we go. Starting the adventure.
See, that is one of the really cool things I think about motivation of the Han Solo character and his evolution. Yes, that's where we see him in point one, but that point one's not really point one anymore because now we have Solo and we see more of his motivations from there. and then okay, that's what we think, but then that changes over time. It's like, and everybody comes to, as you come to love Han. If that had been him, it's like, nope, I'm gonna take the money, I'm gonna take you over here, point A to point B, get my reward, and I'm out. That'd have been one thing. But as we grow to love the character of Han, the way he's written changes. His motivation changes as he grows to care for not just Leia, that he grows to care for Luke. You know, it's these are now his friends, these are his people that he has to continue to help. He's not in it just for the money anymore. He comes to see this is a worthwhile cause. This is something I need to get behind. I can't be in myself and out for only myself anymore.
Well, that's character development over the trilogy.
Well,
Yeah,
where I think it gets to be really interesting is once Solo happens, once we have Solo, we see where he was before he was the jaded mercenary only money. You know, is his Han's arc isn't just like full circle, it's a circle and then another circle and then another circle, because he keeps coming back to that in some of the canon novels, like, you know, I forget, the Han and Billy D like team up with, or Han and Lando team up novel. I think it's that when he's hurt and he's down and out, he goes back to, oh, I'm going to be the scoundrel and the only money, right? Is Han is the idealist. He wants to escape with Kira. He goes and he does this thing. He does this job. He does this motivation. He loses Kira. Up back to, I'm doing a job. I'm pulling a heist. It's only money. Oh, Kira's back. Oh, I've got to do this for love and the motivation and this. And then, you know, essentially, arguably starts the rebellion by giving away the coaxium and creates this, but then does the job that he's going to for Jabba, up back to only money. Meets Luke, meets Leia, helps the rebellion. I love you, I know. Great. Goes back to that, and we find out in the course of between Return of the Jedi and Force Awakens that something happened there, you know, to ruin his happy home, whatever happened with Ben, and nope, back to being a pirate and a smuggler and only money, and then ultimately sacrifices himself. Let's see, Mike is back over here. He's on Facebook now. He says he doesn't think that Solo's motivation changes. He's always been caring, but because he lacked money, he's always realized the importance of it to help him. So let's go on that. Has the Solo's only caring about money or being mercenary on that, has it always been just to facilitate him doing the greater good?
Well, he didn't care about the greater good when he rescued Leia. It's like, hey, I ain't in this for your revolution. I'm here. I expect to be well paid. I'm in it for the money. Which is why there seems to be a bit of a contradiction. Like something must have happened in the 10 years between Solo and Star Wars to cause him to fall back on being that cynical again. Because he gave up like 99.99% of the value of the coaxium in exchange. That he only had enough money left to buy in for the poker game. And it's like, I don't know if you would have given up that much money considering where you came from, especially since he wasn't even aware of this rebel cell until like 5 minutes earlier when MVS told him about it. It's like, okay, here, take all my money. So yeah, that was a little hokey, but and it kind of contributes to the whole thing of making the galaxy smaller by having all the characters tied into absolutely every little event. But in the original trilogy, the implication seemed to be that he came back at the end to save everybody because he came back for Leia, because he's already had that adversarial type relationship with her in the first movie. So he came back for Leia, and we could see that because at the beginning of the second movie, you can see the Han and Leia's relationship has already been building for a while. It's just that they're still kind of, which is why he's frustrated that she wants to stay here. He's like, come on, let's get the hell out of here. Because he still doesn't really, but like he figured, like he told Luke, oh, great shot. That was 1 in a million. He doesn't really seem to believe even at that point that they're going to win. It takes him being rescued and Return of the Jedi, where he finally, from a moral standpoint, gets it, because he did sacrifice himself in Empire Strikes Back, that he's going to finally step up and be the leader. Like he's a changed man by that point. And granted, that doesn't mean that he had a bad moral compass before. Like Kira says, you are a good guy deep down. You just try and put out this, you put on airs of being a scoundrel. But like you said, he's just like from a street urchin. He's got to do that at some point. You got to make money. But at certain points, there's a little tads of inconsistency. And one of my big gripes with Episode 7 is that it's the only Star Wars movie which skips over significant and necessary steps in the actual saga of the story. Like we still don't know exactly what the relationship was like between father and son. Because in Last Jedi, when Rey angrily accuses Kylo of you hate your father and you killed him, and he says, I didn't hate him. And he kind of said that really quickly, but they never really elaborated on what that whole relationship was. And it feels like a significant missing piece that if it was there, it would make more sense as to why Han kind of regressed as a character to go back to just being, the pirate, the smuggler.
You've hit on two things that, again, I would love to see more content. I know people have said, get away from the Skywalker saga. Okay, let's go out in left field. There are things I still want to know. I would like to see a Kylo Ren backstory movie or TV show or something, or comic book or literary. I don't care. I would like to see some Kylo Ren backstory that tells me that tells me more about the what we've just gotten the hint at the Badass Knights of Ren. I mean, I think we've gotten some comics that tell us that as well, though.
Yeah, the comics are pretty good actually in terms of diving into the lore of that whole subcult, which is pretty interesting. I would love it if they were to do like a live action miniseries on that. That'd be great. They got the content there. Just even I know they don't want to remake stuff they've already done, but it's like if you want to fill in the gaps of your own story, you got stuff right there.
you do. It's a huge thing, and I don't get me started on Hollywood and not taking advantage of content that they already have in comic books, because that's the entire problem with the DCU. Enough said. But I'd love to see that, and here's the other thing too, that 10 years or so, that what made Han lose his affinity for the rebellion when he gives them everything and he's back to only money is the job that he's doing for Jabba. Why he owes Jabba that money. Dear Ron Howard, make Solo 2 happen. Let's find that out. But enough of that. So we talked about him. We touched on it's that Leia won't leave with Han. She obviously loves him. And we've seen young Leia now in Obi-Wan. What are Leia's motivations? What's making Leia be who she is?
She was raised that way by Bail Organa and grew up in the whole rebellion and educated, brainwashed, whatever, if you will, into being the rebel soldier. And she inherited a lot from her mother, I suppose, and that, and because she's a good person.
Gio?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with like her conditioning and her environment and where she's raised in that sort of old Iranian royal household, but still knowing that there's a much larger scale to things beyond their own world, the galaxy at large. We have hints of that in the Obi-Wan show, but I think it's, if you go back to where we first see her in the first Star Wars film, she has this defiance and this sort of sense of integrity in that she will very much stick to her convictions. And if she'd been raised in the way to see that the Empire is this kind of unstoppable military force that's imposing itself on many worlds and trying to do that to her own. It's a shame we don't see more of Alderaan anywhere, whether it's in the first Star Wars film or in TV shows. But I think she has this steadfastness to commit to a cause, and it happens to be that she has the integrity to see it through and to see the battle through. from her side to try and bring kind of peace and harmony back to the galaxy and stop this kind of hostile militaristic force spreading around further. And you could say that she was lucky in a way to be raised in the way that she was, given where she came from and how closely that almost couldn't, very close to not happening the way things turned out, given who her father was. And yeah, I guess she had a much better roll of the dice to go to Alderaan than to be settled on Tatooine and hidden away completely, because she has that sort of engagement and sort of network and connection with other people who are wanting to stay in this fight against the Empire. Whereas, I mean, with Luke, it's a lot harder, and that's why his takes on the more classic hero's journey type story that we see. Yeah, there's some aspects of play that are clear and some are not.
Yeah, see, that exactly what Catherine said is what, before Obi-Wan, before seeing her in her younger years, and we'd seen a little bit of it, but it was older, like 15, 16 years old in Rebels. We'd seen just a touch of that. I would have completely and totally assumed, yes, it's because she was raised in the Organa household. She was raised in the house of a prominent senator that was all about the Republic, and she was conditioned or brainwashed to be that way. But I think Obi-Wan made me change my mind, because I always assumed, I mean, there was the one little moment in Return of the Jedi that was like, never knew my real mother or whatever. I kind of glossed over that, I think, in my mind, and I assumed that she grew up thinking that the Organas were her parents. I mean, she took the name. We didn't know that was just her hiding, just that was it. She grew up, I'm going to be the Organas. I'm the daughter of a senator. I have to be prim. I have to be proper. I have to do the proper education and do the thing. But we see in Obi-Wan that her entire life, from a young age, she's been a rebellious little child. She's been out there. She's known her own mind and done that. Well, yeah, Mike's like going, she always knew she was adopted. And it's like, I get that there's a lot of things that happen in Star Wars that are canon, that are known by some, that aren't. And I'm going with, on the limb, that if that she didn't know, that she always assumed she was an Organa, is powerful enough or vague enough to get into my head canon. It's out there in a lot of people's head canon. A lot of people are probably thinking that if it hasn't been beaten the fans over the head with enough to say that a lot of people assume that. But just, I think Obi-Wan opened up a lot of what her personality has always been, and how young and independent, and what her mind was. Because Mike is sitting there going that her motivation or her purpose has been the same as Luke's, is to bring balance to the Force. That's why Yoda says that if Luke won't work, there is another. But that's vague, Mike. They could say he was talking about Grogu. You don't know that yet. But so, yeah, I mean, her motivations, I don't know. I think Leia has been powerful enough, and again, you read into the headcanon and you read into the personality of Carrie Fisher, and you bring that into the character. I always have to. It's just, she's rebellious. She's going to do what she wants to do. She's coming into her own power and leading the rebellion, because it's somewhat of that sense of duty, but I don't think she would just completely go with the way that she did it, because that's not how Bail Organa did it. is he would do it from behind the scenes. He would do it with the political mechanism, whereas Leia is picking up a blaster and going to shoot somebody in the face. You know? I don't know. Any other major characters that we think have an interesting motivation? Mike's like, the chosen one is Broom Boy. Okay, go.
I'm still surprised that people make a big deal about Broom Boy, because it was so obvious what that was supposed to mean, and they keep wondering, why didn't he show up in episode 9? Where's the series about that? And I'm like, oh my god, it's like I can't with these people anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot of the missed opportunities and things that were said in such a way, but not conclusion, and putting you in there that were in the mishmash, half of this, half of that, of The Last Jedi, the beautiful visuals, the let's cram a space horses scene in the casino for whatever. Yeah. That's a discussion for another day. But any other potential major characters that we would like to examine their motivations and how it ties in, or things that may affect the series going forward, or this saga, I guess, as
I don't think it, not necessarily affecting the saga going forward, but I think it's worth saying that one strength that really is present in the sequel trilogy is Adam Driver as Kylo Ren. He really sells the idea of somebody who becomes very obsessed and very single-mindedly wanting to emulate somebody to a very toxic and damaging level. And I think the idea behind Kylo Ren and the idea of Ben Solo as a character would have been to sort of give that inversion to, in a way, a kind of different take on Luke and Anakin, in that you have somebody who starts from the dark side and is kind of then beckoned back towards the light, in essence, which was an interesting way of going about having a kind of hero or villain character, and kind of drawing their arc. And I know it didn't really turn out the way it was intended, and there wasn't much planning behind the scenes, but I think the idea of having a villain who straight away we know the backstory of a little bit, and it is revealed in just almost offhand by Snoke in the middle of The Force Awakens, confirmed that Han Solo, your father. Just kind of random and kind of jarring, but also when I think you first take in that information, you think that's a pretty big moment, and it's kind of mentioned in a side note type way. But the idea of having somebody who is the direct product of two of the main heroes from the original trilogy start off as a villain, I think was an interesting idea. And the motivation behind him is, I guess, abandonment, obsession. But you could say again, there's definitely this kind of narcissism and kind of raging ego, and to have that sort of temperamentality in a villain, I think was interesting to see, and a little bit unusual for a saga that, for the main part, the villains in the major films tend to be quite black or white, and to see somebody kind of bounce a little back and forth, and for a villain to, on the one hand, act very single-mindedly in front of the minions, but then in private be split apart and kind of torn. And you see one of the, I think, more interesting parts of The Last Jedi is seeing that tension between these kind of two opposing worldviews pull on Kylo Ren further and further, to a point where then there are huge strains in his character, and he's feeling uncertain. I think to see a super villain that has a lot of uncertainty and doubt, it was an interesting idea, and I think a reasonable way of telling a sort of different story for a dark side type character.
Well, see, Mike's over here mentioning, and I assume that he's Mike being a huge comic book reader and one of the hosts on our sister show, the Jedi Archives, is that Ben was seduced from a young age by Snoke, who we know from Rise of Skywalker is really puppet master, cloney something of Palpatine at really young age, because Sheev has realized the potential of the power in his Skywalker blood, which, you know, we've never really kind of seen might be a lot of the reason behind the Jedi's ruling of you know, not really having attachments, because maybe the breeding of powerful Jedi and people behind that, yeah, because, you know, there are the arguments again that maybe Han was force sensitive. That's how he did the school run. Anyway, everybody's force sensitive, but he's the thing that Ben was seduced from a young age, and that's the motivation in there. And it's just another one of those stories. That great, yeah, is we want to see more of that kind of thing. Is that's been introduced into one set of the fandom, the people who have read all of those comics, the people who have read all of those novels, is talk about it more. You don't have to hit it over the head, but point us in that direction and let us explore more of them. And I think that's what we continue to get to do. Is Mike also mentioned over there that, you know, what are the motivations of Mon Mothma? I think we're going to see more of that in the Andor series. What are the motivations? What's the backstory behind why is Grogu the way he is? Why is he reluctant to use the Force? He's only doing it in protectiveness. Why has he, you know, latched on to Din Djarin as a father figure? There's so much to explore in a galaxy far, far away, and we get to continue seeing that the more content that there is that comes out. And who knows, as different people chime in, as different writers write, you know, we may see more retconning of what Palpatine was doing. You know, did George intend him to be this conniving politician character that he was? Did he have that when he wrote the original trilogy, or did he just come up with that later as he wrote the prequel trilogy? Was that part of his huge 12 movie plan from the beginning? I don't know. We don't know. We'll find out. Is the galaxy grows, the galaxy changes, it and we read into it differently as we grow and change with it. That's what I love about Star Wars. I think that's what a lot of people enjoy about Star Wars. That's what some people bitch and moan about Star Wars online on a regular basis too, but that's what makes this fun. So I think that's it. Closing thoughts, everybody.
Good talk.
Okay, we wrapped it up. That's what it is. So, all right. So until we see you again in 2 weeks on the Unifying Force, check out tomorrow night. Check out Celebrating Autographs with Frank Rich. If you've got questions about the autograph hall at Star Wars Celebration, if you want to know more about we touched on the backstory of the Darksaber, is Rebels Revisited, also on tomorrow night. And then Jedi Archives will be on next Sunday. Ooh, I missed. Tuesday night, we're watching along The Bad Batch. Thursday night, we'll be continuing our watch-alongs with the Book of Boba Fett in the March to the Mandalorian Season 3. So much content that we have even on our channel to tell you about what's going on at the world of Star Wars. We hope you join you. We hope you join us. Thank you for watching. May the Force be with you.
The Force be with you all.